Hello. So in the last lessons, we covered how to create index fields and organizational structures for documents. And in this lesson, what we're going to cover is spaces, which is how we handle contextual metadata for documents and also just for the metadata itself. So the 2,000-foot overview is that a space is something similar to a playlist in iTunes. It's a way for us to group documents and metadata together based off the context, not necessarily based off the specific data itself. So what that means is that we can take Drivve a step further from just being a document management system or a way to find data or documents or files, and we can turn it almost into sort of an ERP system or an accounting system. It's a full database there that we can scale up and down and that we can integrate and really make it easy for people to run their organization with Drivve, not just find things and store them. So a space first and foremost can be hidden. If we're only using Drivve for search and retrieval and full text search, which is often the case, we can go into the right section, and for the user right or whichever right that we're giving to the users, we can remove the view spaces bit, and what that means is they won't even see that spaces section when they log in. So that makes it easy, makes it cleaner if we're not using any of these functions. If we're not really retrieving, we're mainly just using it for storage, and for the documents we can just hide it. But spaces can also be created pretty quickly here. We do the first thing in the type section. So you saw this earlier, the space types and the space statuses. And what this is a way for us to organize or to create organization for what kinds of things we're storing and how we're finding them. So perfect example, if we're using Drivve for an accounting use, we could go ahead and put two different kinds of spaces here, maybe customers and vendors. And we could also give them a status if it was like current vendors or past vendors or anything like that. And so what you'll notice is in the filing structure, remember we had this as sort of a taxonomy, so accounting, AP, AR. Normally in a system what you would do is you would either have an index field for the documents for the vendor name, or you would create a folder here manually for each one. Well, we do something similar, although we do it with spaces. So a space allows you to search across the whole filing structure. So let's say, for instance, an employee file. Well, that employee might have contracts that are related to them. They might have documentation that they've written. They may have HR docs, may have accounting docs. And a space is a way to kind of bring everything together based off that grouping. We could also do something like an employee has a space, so each employee has a space. Or for instance, if it were a school, we could say, maybe each student has a space. So when I go to find the space now, I can search by customers and vendors, employees. Let's go ahead and create one manually here. Let's call it, how about Bobby Hill gets a space because he is an employee, and his status, well, we don't have a status there, but we can give him a number and a start date and everything like that. Let's also create one for a vendor. So let's say maybe B's Beverages, that's a good vendor of ours. And let's say it's a current vendor and it's got a unique number and we don't have to give it a date. So what I can do is when I go to find a space, let's say I want to find every document related to one of my vendors. I want to find contracts and invoices and receipts and everything. Well, instead of just searching through all the documents, what we really want to find is that vendor. So that's where space comes in. We'll say, let's find a vendor who's a current vendor, and maybe the name contains a B. So we search and we find B's Beverages, and when we're integrating this with another system, this can be a list of thousands if it's your accounting system or your ERP system or something. So I go in and find B's Beverages. I see all the information about B's Beverages. I can write notes about B's Beverages, maybe change of address, etc., whatever. I can add documents to B's Beverages, And let's see, if I go back and find this document that I had brought in before, if I open up the filing room, actually let's bring in another one. So I brought in this document here, and I'm going to open up the filing room and see it's got the unique or the standard index fields here because it's not a part of a filing or an indexing set. And here, as I start typing, I get a confirmation of the spaces. So here's where the value really comes in with the spaces. We're able to control what information we tag, so we don't have people typing out B's or making beverages BV, GS, or whatever. We can confirm that we want this document to be for this vendor. So that saves a lot of time and people naming it differently or finding documents once you put it in there. And here, if I look at B's Beverages now, I see that there's a note, and I can find that document there that's related to B's Beverages. And so all the documents related to B's Beverages, the indexes, or sorry, the invoices, the receipts, the POs, that'll all be here inside of the space. So, like I said, it's an optional tool that we can use to make Drivve DM almost into an ERP system or a student management system or an HR system. And we can really start saying things about the documents, or sorry, about the groups themselves, not just the documents within the groups. So a couple big functions with the spaces also are in the management console. It's one thing to find the space based off the name or the type, but we also have the ability of adding unique index fields here for the space. So for instance, if I wanted to add a value for the space for, maybe which region is the vendor in, I could say, well, I want it to be an enumeration. And here I can create a couple different regions, and each vendor can be associated to one of our different regions. So it works it works similarly to documents. I want to maybe allow no value. I want to allow a search for this value, and I want to index this value. I can also show where in the space columns the index field goes. So let's say I'll do a northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. So those are our 4 regions. So if I save that, and I'm going to log out and log back in, if I find my vendor here, here you see now there's a field for the region. So we can go about saving these fields and creating all these different sets of indexes for the spaces. So for instance, if it's a vendor, we want to show the region, we want to show the ship to address, we want to show the contact phone number, and all of those relevant fields for the vendor that are sort of one level above the documents themselves. So we can also create space fields, permissions on these space fields. So for instance, maybe only people who are in the accounting group can change the vendor status for the spaces, and everyone else it'll be grayed out. What that allows us to do is use this almost as a dashboard. So for instance, I want to find any vendor that is in the region is the Northeast. I can save that and say Northeast vendors. And so now whenever I log in, I can just click that Save Search, and it'll automatically kick off all the Northeast vendors and give me that dashboard back. So for instance, order processing, new employee onboarding, accounts payable, all that can be done with the space fields, where we can create a dashboard to say I want to see all of my pending employee applications. And that Save Search will cover, that one status that we've created as a field. In the next video, we're going to cover the Jobs tool, which also allows us to sync all the spaces with an external SQL source. So, for instance, an accounting system or an ERP system.